Hello again, everybody. I just wanted to take some time to talk a little bit about paper three and talk about MLA style citation, MLA style works cited page, and MLA style structure on the paper. And so I want to walk through this sample paper that I pulled from a few semesters ago, just because I think it gives a nice middle of the road example of the kinds of things to watch out for and maybe some of the things that you might want to emulate. And so I'm going to edit this as a way to kind of um, show some of the guidelines for the paper. I've had a whole bunch of questions over email about some of the expectations. The paper should be around 5 pages. What I'm really concerned about and what I want to make sure that you're doing is utilizing outside sources to demonstrate your thesis. The outside sources don't need to be anything in print. Obviously, you can use online resources. You can even use the ones that I posted um, on the PowerPoint that's linked under Unit 3. But regardless, the reason this becomes so important is that the ability to use and cite research in writing is one of the learning outcomes for English 104. And so when I'm looking at, who's met the learning outcomes and not, those are the things that I really need to be cognizant of. So watch for that. So in this paper, this individual used Cathedral, and the title of the paper is Cathedral, Learning Empathy Through Sympathy, which I think is a good title. It relates to the thesis, which we're going to talk about in a second. But what we'll look at here is the way in which it meets the learning outcomes for the course. And so we can see that it shows right away that it has a strong understanding of a hook statement, right? It looks outward towards the audience. What does it mean to be human? This is a question that's perplexed philosophers for centuries. With regard to science, humanity is a species with an easily identifiable physical. So I'm going to start by highlighting this. And the reason why this isn't a bad hook, I think it starts off broad, but the defining characteristics of humankind from a scientific perspective doesn't really map to this person's thesis. And so my guess is that what the individual who was writing this was doing was starting really, really broad, which is great when you're in your rough draft. But look at what would happen if this person, and I'm just going to strike this out for a second. What would have happened if this person had started here? Happiness, sadness, other emotions which allow us to feel and allow us to be human, um, set us above other creatures and beasts. The key emotion in this separation is empathy. To simply care about something besides yourself is a talent, maybe an attribute for most people. But for others, it's a skill that requires training and time to learn and understand. So even though this was very, very broad, it cast a wide net, I think that if we were to revise these sentences here, this would provide a lot more kind of directed, targeted hook for the actual audience of the paper. And so just some things to think about when you're editing, when you're revising. The other thing that you'll notice as you're reading through here with me is that there's some really blatant, obvious spelling errors and typos and things that if the person had read this again, they would have seen. So while I don't want to hold people, you know, overly accountable for small errors, it clearly shifts the way that you read the paper and the way that you understand the paper. So I want to scroll down here to this person's thesis. So they gradually narrow, and you can pause the video and you can read, and you'll see some errors here, and you'll see um, some definitions that I think are helpful. But if we scroll down, Carver's protagonists are people at the bottom of the social and economic ladder who feel forced to find comfort in their depression. They're alone, mentally if not physically tired, and too dumb, I highlight this word here, too dumb to offer criticism or cynicism at the society that oppresses them. They are the husks of human beings. They are husks of human beings because they lack empathy, but they're not beyond hope. Some may yet find redemption. even if they don't actively seek it. The conflict is at the heart of Carver's Cathedral. By analyzing its characters, their conflicts, and their resolutions, the reader can find meaning. The pathway to enlightenment is barricaded by a locked door, and the key to open it is empathy. So here's the thesis, really from here all the way down. And so what I would say is you could probably consolidate this thesis, maybe move some of these sentences around. I think that this sentence with the husks of human beings, because they lack empathy but aren't beyond hope, would be a great way to start this paragraph. But essentially, we're analyzing characters, conflicts, and resolutions and looking for ways that empathy can help the characters move beyond their conflict. Right? Now, if we were to say it like that, it becomes a lot clearer. So I feel as though we're one sentence away from having a really clear thesis in this case. So if, at the end of your intro, if you're looking at it, the real question that's going to drive your revision is, what am I trying to prove? Like at the end of this paper, what should the reader know about what I'm trying to demonstrate in the paper, in the text I'm examining? And then the other part that you want to think about is, how are they going to know that I'm right? How are they going to know that I'm not just feeding them a bunch of um, invalid perspectives? How is it that I can firmly plant myself in the reality of the literary text, right? And that's what our research does. And so we'll look down here. What you'll notice as we go down is that we have a topic sentence here, the three characters in the cathedral. A lot of the first part of this paper, and again, you can pause if you want to read this. I'm not going to attach it because um, I didn't want to, I didn't have permission from the student at the time. I had permission to use it, but not to copy it. So I'm just going to leave it up here. But we see another kind of thesis here. My guess is that if we were to look through this paper holistically, we would see that in the first three paragraphs, this writer is trying to find their primary conflict that they want to analyze through the rest of the short story, or through the rest of the paper, excuse me. Okay, we have a lot of background information as we scroll, right? We essentially, this writer, the student, retells the story from beginning to end, which is helpful in terms of giving us a way to think about it. But you want to assume that the people that are reading your paper have also read the story. And so you can jump right into your analysis without having this kind of exhaustive review of what it is that you've read. I believe that you've read it. I believe that you've seen it or listened to it. That's really not what we're trying to do here. So as long as you're pointing to the context of each quote that you're citing, you're good to go. So this is an example of how you could do that. So rather than taking, and we're now on page 3, going into page 3. If we look at the first part of this paragraph, instead of retelling the story in the last page, if we were to start, can't see my finger, if we were to start with this analysis, Robert is everything that the husband in the story is not. He is caring, understanding, and empathetic. From the second sentence of the story, his wife had died, Raymond Carver generates immediate sympathy for the character. So this would be a great opportunity where it says from the second sentence of the story, where you could begin telling what happened at the beginning of the story without an entire kind of line by line recount of what was going on. So maybe instead of from the second sentence of the story, his wife had died. So at the beginning of the story, when the narrator is recounting the series of events that led up to the upcoming visit, he uses the phrase, quote unquote, his wife had died. Raymond Carver generates immediate sympathy for the character. And so that gives you an opportunity to kind of give a little bit more background about what's about to happen or what you're about to cite without having to go and retell the entire thing and then start from scratch here at the beginning of page 3. But notice though, what I really like, and I'm going to say a bunch of positive things, I like that the author of this paper, the student who wrote this paper, is using a bunch of quotes throughout here. I like that the quotes, some of the excerpts are paraphrases. That's really helpful. I like how well cited it is and that the citations come, excuse me, from a number of different points throughout the text. Now, there's probably some room here for additional commentary, but there's never a point where we feel as though, as a reader, that we're reading something separate from the text. Now, if the question comes up, if you're wondering how to use outside sources, if you're wondering how to use primary and secondary sources, remember, primary sources are those ones that were written like out of thin air, right? They were created and they're a thing in and of themselves. A secondary source is a commentary on some primary source. Okay, so if you're wondering how to use outside research, um, he actively resents his lot in life and expresses his dissatisfaction by maintaining a deep depression through alcohol and substance abuse. He does not even have a military industrial thing to oppose like his wife. When you get that depressed, you cease to exist. And here we see a citation. I'd like to see a little bit more about what it means to when you get that depressed, you cease to exist. But clearly, this person has cited an outside source. And here we see again, so complete is his misperception that the blind man gives him a faculty of sight that he is not even aware that he lacks. So here we have another, this is a secondary source that talks a little bit about the text and about the perception that the blind man gives to the narrator. Maybe a little off topic. I think that it would have been enough to kind of talk about the depression and how alcohol and substance abuse fueled that depression. However, we can see that both of these perspectives are rooted in professional outside sources, right? Peer reviewed, peer edited outside sources. And the paper goes through, and I'm going to keep scrolling here so you can pause and read if you'd like. And it might be something that you look to do as you're writing your paper to kind of look at organization. And again, I don't think that it's necessarily a perfect paper, but I do think it does the right kinds of things. And there it is. So in terms of the paper itself, I went through and kind of showed you some of the positives, some of the negatives, some things to look at. But I would treat this paper kind of like an exemplar, even though there's some ways that we can learn from mistakes that this person made in the first page, page and a half. Now, in terms of the MLA style, I want to spend a little bit of time because I always get a lot of questions. I've actually already gotten some remind messages and some emails about MLA style citations. So I want to spend some time and review that. So in terms of your MLA style on this paper, this is what your heading is going to look like more or less. You're going to move your date here. Okay, so here's your name. Here's my name. Here's the course that you're enrolled in. Here's the date that the paper is due. So this is going to be the 10th of May. And then we have a title here. So it had the name of the assignment at the end. You don't need the name of the assignment. You don't even need an extra space there. Um, so it's your name, it's my name, it's the course that you're enrolled in, and it's the date that the paper's due. Okay, and then when it comes to MLA style page numbers, you go up to Insert, Page Number. You want it at the top of the page, justified to the right, and then you type your last name with a space here. When you close, this is what it looks like. And if I scroll down, you can see that it's at the top of every page. Now your title does not need to be underlined. And your title is the same font, it's the same font size as everything else. It's centered in the middle of the page like this person has it right here. And you are going to capitalize everything except for, oops, you're going to capitalize everything except for articles, so a, and the, conjunctions, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, and prepositions. So those are direction and place words. So like I was always taught, anything a squirrel can do to a tree, right? So a squirrel can go beyond a tree, under a tree, near a tree, over a tree, right? Under a tree. So, which is why I took the T down to lowercase here, right? So Cathedral, Learning Empathy Through Sympathy. Again, I think it's a great title because it's a reflection of the thesis. And a title, you know, if you're just going to have it be paper one, you almost don't even need a title, right? Or paper three. If you are looking for something that has a function, right? You're talking about the theme of your paper before you dive into your hook statement, right? So that the audience potentially has a place to put these ideas. So we're reading Cathedral, right? If you know Cathedral by Raymond Carver. So I might say Raymond Carver's Cathedral. Learning empathy through sympathy, something like that. That might be the way that I kind of structure it. We know what we're reading. So if you're familiar with the text, this will be relevant. We know what empathy is. We know what sympathy is. And so we can kind of begin to think about how we're going to understand the text. If I scroll down here, so this is actually great. So two ways to cite. You can include the author's name if you want to leverage the expertise of that author. So you can include the author's name in the introduction to your quote, for example, like this. So Philip K. Dick writes, "You have to be with other people in order to live at all." Or you can also cite in text like this. "If you don't love me, okay." And then you have no punctuation here at the bottom, a single space, you open parentheses, the author's last name, a single space, the page number it occurs on, close parentheses, and here's your punctuation at the end. Here's another example of that. So I can highlight this, I'll highlight some of these. Here's another example of that. And another thing that this paper does well is it does a nice job introducing the idea. As he exists before the events of the story, the husband, quote, is numb and isolated, a modern man for whom integration with the human race would be difficult, so difficult that it is futile. And so when you come to the end of the paper, all of these, so let's take Fracknitz, this last name here. When I look at the end of the paper at your works cited page, I should be able to find that text in your citation. And really that's all in-text citation does. It's kind of like an endnote that refers you to the bottom of the paper, that refers you to where I can find this text. if it's an electronic text and it doesn't have a page number, you just put the author's last name. You don't have to put the whole URL or anything. If it's a PDF, you would put the page number of the PDF. Okay, so all that does is it tells you how to find that text because you're not going to write the entire citation each time you use it, right? So it's shorthand for what we see down here. Now, this is pretty good. It's not perfect. So in your own works cited page, you want the word works cited to be centered, and you want the second line to be indented a ½ inch. So it'll look like this. And it should all be in alphabetical order. So we see Carver, Dick Phillip, Fracknitz Mark, Mays Kelly. And this person used 4 sources. 4 or 5 sources is more than enough for this paper. It's a fairly short paper, 5 pages. It's 5 to 7, but it is no extra points for going to 7. I know everybody's time is valuable right now. It's a fairly short paper. 4 sources should be enough to adequately prove your thesis. If you have any questions beyond what I've covered here about citation or about structuring this paper, about what it is that it entails, I would refer to the other video. It's on the PowerPoint presentation that I have linked, page 4, I believe it is. It's the one, it says assignment sheet down at the bottom. I have a presentation linked there. If that still doesn't answer your question about the assignment, then please feel free to send me a Remind message. I'd be happy to either answer your question on Remind or set up some kind of a conference if that's going to be helpful for you. Hope you're all well, and I'll talk to you soon.